it's not as nefarious as everybody makes it out to be.
And then that way, when you start two, Peter's like, I don't want these powers because they cost me so much.
I like Venom, but I hate Carnage.
But they wouldn't have started with Iron Man.
Have you met Rob Liefeld?
I'll get in line. I'll put a baseball cap on.
I've never thought about that.
Trey, listen, I did it again.
John Byrne! John Byrne!
Very temperamental and has a lot of female energy.
Oh my gosh.
It's like a freaking dictionary. Raz Al Ghul.
Darkseid.
This is really interesting.
What are you, nuts?
That's a great question.
John Byrne hates me. So
how's your coworker who makes poor life choices doing these things?
There's like a new boyfriend. So there hasn't been any black eyes.
Oh,
recently. And, you know, if you're going to keep it real, your boyfriend doesn't work.
Hey, you know, I'm toxic.
Say no more. Me too.
I thought you were going to tell me it was the Tick. He needs a new battery, dude.
He does. Let's smoke some nice little cloud.
He's totally dying.
Have you met Rob Liefeld?
Yeah. then
all you Sheehannites, don't forget to go to Organic Price Books. That's organicpricebooks.com. Yes. Save yourself $2. Make a real easy account. It's really simple to set it up at organicpricebooks.com. You save yourself $2. Next thing you know, you accumulate points and you can use them for coupons. And the coupons are easily redeemable.
When Brian orders at Organic Price Books and then the truck arrives, you hear beeping as the truck is backing up to the building and they're looking for the loading dock. It's a good thing you've got an elevator, dude.
I'm not carrying that big book. It's way too heavy. It's like a freaking dictionary with her Long Island accent. Go downstairs and get that. I'll push out a higher window. Oh boy. Was it say Death Star Rising?
So this is number 99, the original Uncanny. It was 25 cents. Anyway, Cockrum cover, early, if not first, Alpha Flight.
John Byrne. Hey, Scott, can you get that signed for me? Because John Byrne hates me.
Yeah, I'll get in line. I'll put a baseball cap on. I did not have this one. I missed because remember, like, as you said, I was buying comics at the liquor store in the little town that I lived in. And so he wouldn't always have enough for all of the issues. So I guess that's got the origin of Colossus. This one I did purchase at the newsstand, not on a spinner rack, but the White Queen.
No, the White Queen.
Emma Frost. So the lead up to the Death of Phoenix or the Dark Phoenix. This one was kind of fun. The first appearance or full appearance of Dazzler. As a kid, I thought this is really cool, the way they stylized the logo. The disco lights on it. The story is not the greatest, but
who wrote that one?
This is John Romita.
Oh.
As far as the cover art and inside, let's slide it out here and take a look. So 130, 1979. Chris Claremont, of course, was the writer. Byrne was Byrne was the penciler. Austin was the inker. So this was like prime Austin and Byrne, you know, just
Raz Al Ghul. And I'm like, I die a little inside every time he says it.
So this is why I can feel not horrible calling Darkseid.
And I got a Blue Yeti mic.
Gentlemen.
Hey, you got your headphones, man. What's up, dude? Yeah, he blocked me, so.
That's pretty funny.
Well, you deserved it.
Yeah, and we forgot to ask you that on your first visit. Have you met Rob Liefeld?
A bunch of times, yeah. He's a fan of Cinema Blend, and he would come to our interview suite at San Diego Comic-Con a bunch and just talk movies because he's a movie fan.
He loves movies.
He has a quote on the back of the Snyder Cut book. He was one of the first people to read it and give me an endorsement.
As you might recall, I have somewhere a copy of that book, and it was signed, of course, as you might remember.
Nice.
So, dude.
Hey. Yeah, look at that. Look at that, huh? With great power.
I just finished it, except for the last 6 minutes today.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Huge twist ending.
In the last 6 minutes?
Yeah, you're going to be shocked. You learn that all three Spideys were dead the entire time. The whole thing.
What's your favorite scene in The Breakfast Club?
I like when Bender does the whole no dad, what about you? You back and forth to show how messed up his family life is.
Okay.
That's
That is
probably the
powerful.
moment in that movie where I was like, oh, this is going to be a little more serious than anticipated. This isn't just, 5 goof-offs in detention kind of thing.
Right. Right.
So I like that. And of course, Bender was like, you idolized him, when you were a
Right.
teenager. That's the kid you wanted to be, basically. Me, anyway.
So I appreciated in your book about the reference that the script writers were going back to the John Hughes films.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I thought that
And
was cool.
they fit Ferris Bueller into it as a cue when he's running through the
Yeah.
backyards
Right.
of everybody's houses.
Yeah.
That was the first like Marvel Universe thing, right? Like first interwoven crossover.
I think so. Sure. Yeah. Let you know that Ferris is part of that universe. And I like that too, because there's that party scene in Homecoming, and it was the 2 screenwriters. His wife was like, if you guys are doing a John Hughes movie, like you need a party scene in it. And they were
Right.
like, yeah, I guess we do need a party scene in it.
Good idea.
Yeah.
You said like she was just kind of like around the periphery, in and out and whatever.
Yeah.
And then she's like, she overheard the conversation, and then she's like, party scene.
So
Truly.
they're very funny. This is Jonathan Goldstein and John Francis Daly. They're
Yeah.
they co-wrote Spider-Man Homecoming, but they've also been directing.
Sean, if you had a movie credit on something, would you put your middle name like Sean
No.
Joseph O'Connell? Or
It's William, and no, I don't think so.
I think
I've
you
never
should use Joseph.
never really
anyway.
used it.
Sean,
His is a lot worse than what I get.
Scott,
Believe me.
just to let you know. So Kevin McCarthy, one of Sean's right hand best friends, him and Jake on Cinema Blend that you've listened to.
Okay. Yeah.
People mistake him for Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker of the House,
Oh,
and so
right.
they'll tag him and stuff. But then he responds, he's like, "Why? Is this because I liked this certain movie and this actor?" It's very funny.
It
Yeah.
destroys his social media. Like if there's ever a day where something highly politicized happens, he knows that like for a week he can't even look at his mentions because they're just
Yeah.
going to be. And he's
Oh, boy.
Kevin McCarthy TV specifically, but they don't pay that much
Yeah,
attention to it.
right.
They just
Oh man.
just
That
they
must be
hammer
horrible.
him.
So what would the world look like if Sony had purchased the Marvel properties in 98 for $25 million?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. You know what? I don't know, because what if Feige ended up, going there?
I was
You know,
wondering
like-
about that. It probably could happen.
Yeah, of course, because he was working on the X-Men films with the Donners.
Mhm.
Lauren Shrula Donner was producing that, and Dick Donner kind of picked up Feige as an assistant, and it was Avi who essentially, when he was starting up production on Raimi's Spider-Man, who said like, "Hey, can I bring this kid with me?"
Mhm.
Feige. So Feige was on set for a lot of the Raimi stuff. So if Sony purchased those rights because Kevin was such a Marvelite, there's a
Probably would've
world
gone
where
with
he pushes and says like, "Hey, I still want to be part of this universe. Let me help out."
So it could have been more or less basically the same, just not Disney, but Sony.
Yes, but that again is assuming that Sony doesn't trip all over themselves and handles it properly still. You gotta remember, like Marvel at least had a couple of years where they were independent. They were Marvel Studios. Paramount distributed their stuff, and it was only when they really started taking off because, well, I mean, Universal had Incredible Hulk, and then Disney finally swooped in and was like, "You guys are doing a great job. Let's take this away." So maybe there, as long as there was still some sort of independence, and Marvel Studios could have done their first few movies, but they wouldn't have started with Iron Man. I think had Sony purchased it and they would have had Spider-Man, I bet Spider-Man would have continued to be. Or maybe they would have, this is really interesting. Perhaps they would have continued to just build off of, like, maybe the first 3 Tobey movies would have been the quote unquote, beginning of phase 1.
Instead of Iron Man. Yeah.
That's
there was-
I've never thought about that.
And then they were going to do Spider-Man 4, Return of the Youth Pastor.
I love that line. That's
Yeah,
such a
it was-
great joke.
Dude, it was so great. I tapped Scott. I'm like, "That's you," because what Scott always wears like a sports coat, like an old
When we go to the
man kind of
movies.
sports coat when we go.
Yeah,
to the movies.
yeah, yeah.
Are you an MJ or a Gwen guy?
Gwen. I think the Gwen storyline is more intriguing. I never really MJ was so flighty and was a party girl and kind of broke Peter's heart. And I thought the Gwen story with the tragic nature of that and even with Captain Stacy, like losing Captain Stacy, I always just felt like their bond was stronger. MJ was kind of an on again, off again type thing, which is why I complain about this often. I'm not sure if I've complained about this on your guys' show. It bothered me about the first Raimi movie, in that they essentially put MJ into the Gwen Stacy, one of the most famous Gwen Stacy scenarios, by putting her atop the bridge and having the Goblin essentially knock her off. And watching that as like this Spider-Man purist, from the minute that they put her up on the bridge, I was like, well, this is weird. I kind of wonder why they did this. Is it going to be that much different? Then the Goblin knocks her off, and I was like, in the moment, I'm like, are they killing her off here? Like, are they doing the Gwen story with MJ? And then she gets saved. And then, so in hindsight, after that movie came out, I was like, especially when 2 came out and he gets to this point where he was like wrestling with, am I happy with these powers? Am I not happy with these powers? And if they wanted to get to that point, I was like, they missed a golden opportunity to start that franchise with Gwen, actually kill her in the first movie. And then that way, when you start 2, Peter's like, I don't want these powers because they cost me so much, and I thought it would have been a more of a natural evolution too. But that's just a hardcore nerd being like, you should have done this. Yeah. Instead of realizing that it was a really good movie. It's still a terrific movie, but that little plot detail annoyed me that they kind of did that with, because then they get to Gwen in Spider-Man 3 and she's essentially a castaway, like she's hardly registers.
Well, what do you think of what's her name, Emma Stone?
I thought she was terrific. Right? I thought she was terrific, and I mean, a lot of it is her chemistry with Andrew. The two of them had a combustible chemistry. They were phenomenal together.
Yeah, way more than McGuire and Dunst.
You're right. I never bought into them as a relationship.
Yes. I actually cried a little bit, and I'm not as big a Spider-Man fan. I mean, I'm a DC guy. I think I told you that last time. So when I saw Amazing Spider-Man and she like died and he's holding her, because I knew what was going to happen, having familiar with the comics, but still, like, that made a tear come down my eye. That was very, very sweet.
They handled it. They handled that very, very well.
And then what about in Homecoming when MJ goes off the bridge? I was like, oh, they're gonna do it.
In No Way Home, you mean? In No Way Home.
Yes, thank you. No Way Home.
Yeah. Oh, I know. And what was great about that scene
that was exhilarating.
Is fantastic. It was fantastic because it gave Andrew. What I love so much about No Way Home is that it found a way to give both Toby and Andrew buttons on their story. Like it gave them, each of them, closure. Like Toby had that great moment with Alfred Molina's Dr. Octopus. I wish that Defoe's Goblin had a little bit more with Toby, or anything with Toby, because they were initial foes. I wish they had something, but to give Andrew redemption, for the loss of Gwen being able to save Holland's MJ was pretty great.
Well, I was just a little kid and I didn't really know about the relationship, and it was just like, oh, superhero Spider-Man, and then that someone actually died, and it was just like, oh, whoa. And that, I think, was what tweaked my interest and turned into having a thirst for the X-Men.
Oh, cool.
The late 70s, X-Men, John Byrne and that stuff, because they tended to be dark and there was problems and whatnot.
Well, stakes. I mean, I want stakes in all of these stories, essentially, whether it's Marvel or DC. Little nerdy detail also in Amazing Spider-Man 2, when Gwen dies, the clock obviously is the clock tower is falling apart. The pieces are falling apart. The clock hands stop at 122, which is the issue number of Amazing Spider-Man 122.
I love stuff like that.
Where Gwen dies.
What was your first exposure to Spider-Man?
That's a great question. I know that I had like Spider-Man toys and Spider-Man coloring books as a kid. I had something called a Spider-Man hippity hop. I don't know if anyone knows what a hippity hop is. It was like
familiar, but what was it?
It was like a big ball that you sat on, and it had a
sit And it's
yeah,
like,
exactly. Yes, had a
Okay.
rubber head, and I had mine was a Spider-Man rubber head that had two things coming out of his. And when I was 5, I rode that more than I walked. Like I was just on that all around my house
You can
constantly,
see little Sean hippity hopping down to the comic store.
everywhere. Just I mean everywhere.
Dude, I'll send
So
you $20 if you find that, and we can use it in the thumbnail.
oh please, please. But no, I mean I don't think cameras existed back then.
The world is black and white.
So, but around that time, the 1960s animated show was on a loop. It played right after school, basically, and
Okay.
that was a gateway to the comics. And then from that point, I started diving deep into the comics, and always read Spider-Man because I appreciated his sense of humor more than anything. I liked the fact that he was sarcastic. I liked the fact that he was quippy. I didn't even know what quippy was at the time. I just knew that he was
Oh, you
funny.
liked it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I connected with that.
I get that. That's interesting now that you say it. That was one of the things that did stand out for me. Now, looking back when I read him, I kind of enjoyed that part of it. They tried to do a little of that with the Fantastic Four from time to time, but it was like super lame. It didn't carry the way that it did with Spider-Man.
No, it was part of his personality from the get-go. And because like Captain America is established as stoic and Tony Stark is arrogant, that if you try to inject sarcasm into them, it's not part of their fabric, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
But because from the get-go, they made Peter a teenager who, in the face of danger, his reflexive defense mechanism is sarcasm, or poking fun at. And he had a goofy rogues gallery. I mean, the Rhino and Scorpion and things like that are people who you would kind of make fun of if you ran into them. The Shocker. Yeah, sure. All these guys.
Who's your least favorite villain?
It's a great question. Hold on. Give me a second to think about it. I don't want to go for like a really obscure one.
Mysterio.
I don't. This is going to
with the fishbowl head.
This is going to be no. I love Mysterio. I don't really love. I like Venom, but I hate Carnage. And I'm not a huge symbiote guy. Like that whole phase of the character, I didn't find, and still don't find, as interesting. This black suit. I think if it was a short-term thing that they used where he got it on that off-world planet during Secret Wars, and he brought it back, and it grafted itself to him, and then he figured out how to separate himself from it, and that was the end of the story, then so be it. That would have been a great arc.
Kind of like Monster of the Week.
But keeping the symbiote around and then continuing it from one person to the next person to the next person, it was like, all right, what are we doing here?
What got me into Spider-Man was the 90s cartoon. Did you ever check that out?
All the time.
When he teamed up with the X-Men, it was like, oh my God. It was like the Avengers for kids my age. I was like 13. What's your favorite modern run? Have you kept up with any modern Spider-Man, like in the past like 3, 4 years, 5 years?
I listen, I really don't like Dan Slott as a writer. I've tried. I have tried to read a lot of his stuff, and I can't get into his stuff. That whole storyline where he switches brains with Otto Octavius.
Oh, yeah. People go crazy over that, and they're reprinting the omnibus, and they're like going to sell it out. Like, I don't get that. I'm not down with it.
I don't. So I have Marvel Unlimited, and I'd read a lot of stuff through Marvel Unlimited, the app. So I've been able to keep up with as much stuff as I can. And the best part about it is that, like, if you're stuck in the middle of a run and it's just not working, you can just bail on it. It's not like you purchase the physical copies and you're kind of committed to it. But not a lot has been really catching my attention in terms of Spider-Man stuff lately, which is kind of sad. There's no real continuity to it. The best, and I don't even know how far back this goes because I was late to it, was the Ultimates when they rebooted it, when Brian Michael Bendis wrote essentially a new origin story for Peter, and then through the course of that introduced Miles. I thought that was a terrific reintroduction of the character and a really, really great run, and it had Mark Bagley art, who and I just adore, but I adore Bagley. So
tell our viewers what your channels are.
The website I write for and serve as managing editor for is called Cinema Blend. Brian's been nice enough to mention a couple of times. It's an entertainment website, daily content.
A lot of fun.
Thank you. I do a podcast on a weekly basis with two of my friends, Jake Hamilton and Kevin McCarthy, and that's called Real Blend.
Don't forget Gabe. He'll be upset, right?
He's just the producer.
he's like a kicker in football.
He's like the old guys in the Muppets who sit up in the balcony every once in a while, color commentary chime in. And that's a kind of a news of the week. You know, we do reviews, but then we've kind of established a format where we have a director on each week now for a longer form interview. So that's become the format of that. That's called Real Blend, and hopefully people will check that out. You can get it wherever your podcast needs are met, or we have a YouTube channel that people can visit too as well for a visual element to it.
The Cinema Blend YouTube channel is a lot of fun. Sean and Hannah will make like these breakdown trailers and whatnot. Besides, you know, your typical like 5 to 10 minute cast.
When you hear this, go back to Cinema Blend's YouTube channel and watch. I did the cast of Shazam. And it's going to drop. The full package is going to drop on YouTube tomorrow, so it'll be waiting for people when they are ready for it.
What do you think of the Shazam movie, real quick? What do you think? You think
it's a lot of fun. I can say this now because the embargo lift will have lifted. I've seen it. It's very fun. Okay. It takes all of the things that I thought worked really well in the first movie and amplifies all of them.
Oh, cool.
It doubles down on the family relationship. If anything, maybe the Daughters of Atlas feels a little bit just like Savannah, you know, like, hey, you got the powers instead of us kind of thing. But Helen Mirren and Lucy Liu are really good. Oh. And the special effects in it are really great. I was very surprised at how impressed I was by the visuil effects.
Nice. Now, I've heard that, you know, that Wonder Woman's in it. You'd have to say yes or no, and I'm not looking right now. But any special cameos other than, you know, people with heads?
I have also heard similar things about cameos.
I think he totally answered the question.
I mean, it could be. I appreciate you guys having me on. This is
last time I saw your likeness, you were standing on a red carpet in London for Avatar 2.
Oh,
dude,
wow.
You were like the main man, like you were Avi Arad.
I learned that from The Rock. The Rock says you should make it look like you're adjusting your cufflink. And that's a thing to do when you're posing.
So you're working on a Bruce Willis book, right?
I am. Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Go ahead and just tell us real quick about that.
It's loosely titled Unbreakable, and it's Bruce Willis's legacy on film. Essentially, he's terrific. I mean, how do you not like Bruce Willis?
King.
And so I was kicking around an idea of doing something about 80s action heroes. Essentially, the genre of, you know, Schwarzenegger, Stallone, and Willis during that sort of from the early 80s to the early 90s, that run that they had. Because I think that was pretty unique in terms of action movies. And
dude, that was my childhood.
Yeah. For so many of us, you know. And then in the 90s, things got more glossy. They weren't the action hero, you know, that you kind of know about. So anyway, I was kicking around an idea about that. And then someone beat me to that idea. They have a book coming out that's called The Last Action Hero. And I
like that movie, by the way.
That's a fun movie.
Right? I don't know why people hate on it so much.
Oh, boy.
So then I was thinking like, all right, well, I don't want to abandon the idea completely. And Bruce has always been one of my favorite actors. Die Hard, outside of the comic book realm, Die Hard is my favorite movie of all time.
Have you met him too? Has he been nice to you?
I've never got a chance to meet him before.
Because some people say he's prickly, right?
He does not like doing press, from what I understand. Yeah. And as part of the process of writing this book, I have watched several of his interviews and several of press conferences he's been a part of. And that poor man has gotten an inordinate amount of stupid questions from reporters that amazing. I don't blame him. I would have written off the process if I were him as well too, because I think he'd be a fascinating guy to speak to. And then everybody just wants to ask him, you know, the lamest junket questions that you can imagine. But long story short, you know, we get to the point where, and I actually had been started putting this book together anyway, because I was really fascinated in his evolution as an action star and the different levels of success that he's had. And I think that he's been able to transition from different genres better than any of his contemporaries has. He does science fiction with 12 Monkeys and Armageddon, or
Fifth
Looper.
Element.
Fifth Element, exactly. He'll switch over and he'll work with legitimate auteur directors like Wes Anderson and, of course, Quentin Tarantino for Pulp Fiction. He'll do comedy. He'll do straight on action. And then I wanted to get into this late streak of direct-to-DVD movies that he's been doing, where, the story comes out that these producers were almost, manipulating him because of his inability to communicate. And then it becomes this diagnosis of aphasia. And you realize that, he's actually suffering from a mental deficiency, that he's going through this. That's now been diagnosed as FTD, which is frontotemporal disorder, I think it is. And it's dementia. It's an advanced form of dementia that there's no cure for. And so that when those diagnoses started coming in, I was like, well, this cements it. I'm going down this route because I feel like his is a career that needs to be celebrated. And I start the book with, hey, he announced his retirement. Now I'm going to tell you guys why that matters. Like this is his contributions to film, and this is why I think he's important. So
you're taking it all the way back to the television show?
Everything. Yeah. The earliest one, I start in a section with his comedies, and I kick off with Blind Date. But in the Blind Date chapter, I talk about Moonlighting, and I talk about how there were a good number of stars who were breaking out of television at that time. That's back when Saturday Night Live was turning Bill Murray and Eddie Murphy into, stars. Chevy Chase, obviously. Tom Hanks was coming out with Bosom Buddies, and then Willis with Moonlighting. Like, there's a significant amount of people who are now big time A-listers who started in television.
Right.
And I find it really fascinating. Throughout the course of his career, I found it really fascinating that different decisions he made shaped completely who he was. And I'll give you guys just a quick example. Kevin Smith compared Bill Murray and Bruce Willis when they were coming up as the same kind of character. Like Bruce Willis on Moonlighting had that same sort of thumb your nose at authority, coolest guy in the room kind of thing. And then in the early 80s, they each have a breakout hit. And for Murray, it's Ghostbusters. And for Willis, it's Die Hard. And it put Bruce on an action track, and it kept Murray on his comedic track. And if you think about, not that they were ever up for the same parts, but what if that switched? Like Bruce Willis as David Addison could have very easily been Peter Venkman, easily, and he had the chops to do it. And what if that catapulted him in a different direction where he would have gone to it? I'm not saying that Bill Murray could have played John McClane and become the next action hero. Bruce had a physicality to him that I think was inherent to who he is. But those types of casting decisions or just people picking what project they're going to pick sends them in a different direction that I think is really fascinating for any actor if you take their career and break it down in those stages. Well, I'm not shying away from, he has some duds too, Bruce took some big swings, Bonfire of the Vanities, and Hudson Hawk, which was a vanity project for him. He's got some bombs, and I definitely go into those as well too, and just sort of say, like, here's what I think he was trying to do at the time, but here's probably why it failed, kind of thing.
Cool. So that's going to be your next published book?
Yes, I have to turn the manuscript in June. And so I would imagine, based on the timeline, it'll come out early next year.
Wow, that's great. I'm so looking forward to it.
As opposed to the other two books that I've written up to this point, which were very interview heavy, this one I've had the chance to speak to some of the directors that he's worked with through other projects. Quentin Tarantino has been on our show. M. Night Shyamalan's been on the show. Rian Johnson. And when we've gotten those guys, I've asked them different questions about Bruce's legacy, but I'm not going out of my way to do a ton of interviews for this. This is really analysis. It's really me just sitting down with all of these films. I have 26 chapters for 26 different movies that I'm trying to really drill down into. And so I'm spending a couple of weeks on each of them, watching, rewatching, trying to figure out how they fit into the bigger picture. And then the end of the book is going to be a capsule review of every single film that he's appeared in. It's 115 movies.
Is it that many? Wow.
I have 48 left to go.
I want to cry nerd tears with you over Henry Cavill.
Okay, let's do it.
Do you have any inside?
Here's how I think it went down. And I have some insight, but I don't have anything that I could like report at this time. So I'm just giving you insight into how I think all of this went down. There was a very specific period of time where in a short amount of time, 3 or 4 major things happened. James Gunn was hired to write a Superman reboot, right? This is still when the old regime was in place. We're going to bring back Superman. We want you to write it. You're going to start from scratch, and that wasn't announced. It was just, if we ever, because I mean, you got to remember there were a couple of Superman projects that were announced at that time. J.J. Abrams was working on one. Michael B. Jordan was doing one. Like Warner Brothers was trying to figure out what direction they were going to go in. And I think what happened is they decided, through whatever pitch James came to them with, they were like, we're going to go with this direction. We'll announce it when it's time. Then at that same time, The Rock made a very strong push to give him the power that that eventually ends up with James Gunn and Peter Safran. Make me and Hiram Garcia and $7, give us the reins of DC and let us move forward. And Black Adam will become the cornerstone, and we'll go from there. And they forced them to include Henry in the cameo because they very much wanted Henry to be their Superman.
So excited.
Then they decide then Black Adam tanks, right?
It was bad.
It was terrible. It was actually terrible.
Yes.
But this is another one of those examples of
that cameo. Yeah, go ahead.
Where you can say, if Black Adam made $1 billion, if Black Adam was great and it did really well, we wouldn't be having this conversation. That they wouldn't have hired James Gunn and Peter Safran. They might have actually given DC to the $7 guys, to Hiram and Dwayne, and they would have hired on people, and they would have continued to build off of that universe. You'd probably have a JSA movie coming. You'd probably have, other things that were building off of that. That's why Gunn's wife, and Viola Davis, they were still sort of peppered in, because it was always like, well, we could bridge them to Peacemaker if we wanted to. And we could, if they had a longer term plan, that's the direction they would have gone into. But Black Adam didn't. Black Adam bombed. And that meant that they were going to switch gears. They weren't going in that direction. But what I don't understand is that someone at the executive level had to realize that there was a possibility that Black Adam would not do well, and that $7 and The Rock would not be able to continue. And the people who were in charge had to know at that point that James had been hired to work on this other Superman script. So the fact that they let Henry not do the cameo is fine. The DC has done multiple cameos that don't amount to anything. That's fine. But they let that poor man go out and speak to the press and record a video and say, I'm back. And that's cruel, because they knew there's not even a slight possibility, a strong possibility that we're not going to be able to make do on this promise that we're letting him give to the fans. And I thought that was where they went the most wrong in that, and listen, it's Hollywood. People lose roles all the time. Nothing is guaranteed, but if it were behind the scenes, and if they had said to Henry, we're really going to try to make this work, we're going to bring you back somehow. If Black Adam does great, you're going to be our Superman. Let's do this quietly, keep it behind the scenes. Then Black Adam bombs, and then the studio goes to Henry. Hey, look, it didn't work. We're not going to move forward. We have James writing this Superman script. We're just going to go in that direction. But they let him go out there and publicly say, I'm back.
And then he had that junket, like that mini junket interview with that guy. Remember
Josh
that?
Horowitz. So
Yes.
this is another factor that they probably didn't think about. It's not as nefarious as everybody makes it out to be. It's just
That's how it seems.
Sometimes the timing of it all just lands in a way that because if Henry didn't have Enola Holmes 2 coming out for Netflix, he wouldn't have been doing press at that time. But he had Enola Holmes 2 coming out. So he makes this video, and then a week later, he's got to go do press for Enola Holmes. So, of course, he has to answer about the video. But if that movie wasn't coming out, he wouldn't have been doing additional press, and it wouldn't have been out there as much as it was. That was just a stroke of bad luck that he happened to have a movie to produce at the same time that was happening. So much of this stuff could have been kept behind the scenes until a final decision was made, but they didn't. They showed their hand a little bit. The Rock was probably feeling very confident. If you paid attention to the Black Adam press, the Black Adam promotion was nothing about the movie. It was, hey, guess what? If you guys go see this, you're going to get more Henry Cavill. That was their hook. That was their hook.
They knew the movie was poo.
Yes.
Well, Brian, I was in Walmart today, and just so you know, there are some Black Adam toys on the shelves in Walmart in case you need any.
Henry has a very passionate fan base, and there are people who love him as Superman.
He's a beautiful dude.
I love him as Superman too. I think he's terrific. But there's more than enough data from consumers, and Hollywood is a business, and they make business decisions. There's been more than enough data that shows that a huge audience is not turning out for a Superman movie. Now, maybe they don't tune into what Zack is doing, or maybe the decision to make Man of Steel 2 a Batman versus Superman where your two heroes are mad at each other. Even if the reason for it is justified, and I understand what Zack was doing, but I don't think he ever really got a fair shake, to have his full traditional Superman movie. And I don't think that James Gunn wanted to inherit such a major star. I think I'm really curious what's going to happen with Momoa and Aquaman, because I don't know what's going on with that.
That's the whole thing, though. It's like everybody's been saying, hey man, if you're going to get Henry, not to be fair to Henry, like reboot, but it's like, hey, if you don't want the dust from like the previous DCEU on your stuff, then just get rid of all the furniture. Like, keep some of the furniture, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
because that's like my point of view. Is it's not even so much about Henry as lovely as a man as he is, but it's just kind of like, all right, then. Like my brain is going to constantly be like, hey, there's Gal, there's Jason, there's Ezra, there's a Ben cameo, and then there's Superman.
Well, maybe Gunn's not being completely honest. Maybe Gunn is not planning on necessarily using any of them. But if he was to say that, there'd be huge backlash, and he doesn't want to cause that level of disruption.
Thank you for sharing that. And I got to tell you, dude, I saw, what was it, a couple of weeks ago? Someone was like, hey, Sean, are you going to write about the downfall of the DCU? And you're like, I'm taking notes. Can you imagine, dude, you have so much content without even having to like do research yet, because you've been like right in the thick of it. You could write like 20 chapters and then go talk to people behind the scenes and get like another 10 chapters.
I love that subject matter. I do love the subject matter. I think DC, the story around DC films, prior to everything that happened with Justice League, everything that happened during the Justice League period, and now as a separate segment, everything that has happened post that, has been some of the most fascinating industry type stuff for people who are really into superhero movies, comic book movies, and the way that the business around them operates.
Right.
And I don't think that the DC side of it gets analyzed and scrutinized and hypothesized as well as Marvel. Marvel is like a carcass in the road that's picked over by everybody. And people kind of ignore DC. And I think that there's 1,000 fascinating stories that you could tell.
Sean, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for being
with us. Always a pleasure. Yeah, always a pleasure.
I
hope coming back.
I hope the book's going well for you, and I look forward to the next one.
SeanO'ConnellBooks.com.
Compared to New York City, it is Canada.
Yeah. I know.
And
boys, have a great Friday night.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for joining us.
Enjoy your family, man. Thanks for coming
on,
guys.
Thanks so much.
Dude, that was like, I kind of felt like I was in therapy, man. Show business. And hey, speaking of business, do us some business. Give us some business. How about a like, a subscribe?